The Young and the Restless spoilers. Title: A Heart Remembered. Noah Newman slowly opened his eyes, the sterile white ceiling of the hospital room above him glaring into his blurred vision. The sounds around him were muffled, disorienting, like a distant echo from a dream he couldn't quite remember. He shifted slightly, wincing as the dull ache in his head made itself known. For a moment, everything seemed like a haze of confusion, and then, as his mind cleared, one question filled the void of his thoughts. Where was Audra? Panic flickered in his chest. The beeping of the heart monitor and the quiet murmur of the nurses outside the room only heightened his anxiety. With a strained effort, he lifted himself up, his hand gripping the edge of the bed for support. He swung his legs over the side, the room spinning around him, but the only thing that mattered was the woman who had somehow been absent when he needed her most. Audra? His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but the desperation in his tone was undeniable. Where is she? Where's Audra? Nick and Sharon, who had been standing at the foot of the bed, frozen in confusion as Noah tried to make sense of his surroundings, exchanged a glance. They both looked at him as if he had just spoken in another language, their brows furrowing in concern. Son, you need to lie back down, Nick urged gently, his voice thick with worry. You've had a serious accident. You were unconscious for days. You need to rest. Noah shook his head, still disoriented but fiercely determined. No, you don't understand. Audra. She's my girlfriend. Where is she? Neither Nick nor Sharon could mask their surprise. Sharon's lips parted in disbelief, but it was Nick who managed to speak, his voice cautious but firm. Noah, what are you talking about? Audra hasn't been here. You've been out for so long, and we... Noah cut him off, his eyes locking with Sharon's, searching for answers. But she's the one I've been with. I know her. I remember her. Why isn't she here? The confusion in his voice only grew louder as it settled into a realization that made both Nick and Sharon more uneasy by the second. They exchanged a glance, not knowing how to explain the situation to him, especially when they weren't even aware of what had happened between him and Audra. Nick reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he typed a quick message to Audra, not knowing what else to do. He didn't understand what was happening, and neither did Sharon. But Noah was adamant about one thing: Audra was supposed to be there. It wasn't long before Audra arrived at the hospital, her hurried footsteps echoing through the hallway as she approached Noah's room. The moment she entered, her eyes found Noah sitting up in the bed, looking pale but desperately alive. The sight of him, still very much himself yet altered by the fog of confusion, struck her in a way she wasn't prepared for. Audra froze in the doorway. She didn't know what to expect, but this wasn't it. Her heart stopped for a moment, and before she could think twice, she rushed to his side. Noah, she whispered, her voice breaking as she took in the sight of him, the man she once loved but had lost. He looked at her, his eyes desperate, pleading for answers, for the piece of himself he knew was missing. What's happened? Why are you here? Noah asked, his voice heavy with both relief and confusion. He tried to reach for her, as if somehow, the simple touch of her hand could answer everything he was feeling inside. I don't understand. Why aren't you with me? Audra's breath hitched, and she stepped back, her hands shaking as she tried to process the situation. She had to hold herself together. She couldn't let herself fall apart, not in front of him. Her voice faltered, trying to make sense of the truth that she was still struggling to accept. You don't remember anything, do you? Noah shook his head, his gaze filled with vulnerability. I don't. I remember you. I remember how much I love you, Audra. I don't understand what's happening to me. Audra blinked back, the tears threatening to fall. She couldn't let him see her like this, but she couldn't control the flood of emotions that came rushing in. Noah, we've been through this before. We're not together anymore. You ended things with me. You left me. The word stung, and Noah recoiled as if they were a physical blow. No, he whispered, shaking his head, confusion clouding his features. I never wanted to leave you. Audra's heart twisted as she watched him. His confusion was genuine, and she could see the panic in his eyes as he searched for answers that were no longer there. She wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but the pain of their past hung between them like a wall they couldn't break down. But seeing him like this, so lost and broken, something shifted inside her. She felt an overwhelming wave of empathy. He didn't deserve to be caught in this nightmare, not like this. She leaned forward, her voice soft and raw. Noah, listen to me. You have to remember. We were together, we were happy, but that's not the reality anymore. Her words caught in her throat as the floodgates opened, and her tears spilled over. You broke my heart. Noah's heart ached as he reached out, his hands trembling, desperate to make sense of everything that was spiraling out of control. I don't want to hurt you, Audra. I never wanted that. Audra's chest tightened, and she couldn't keep the tears back any longer. The sight of him, so vulnerable, so confused, made her heart ache for him in a way she hadn't expected. And despite the history, despite everything they had been through, her feelings for him hadn't vanished, they had merely been buried, suppressed by the layers of time and hurt that had accumulated between them. But now, seeing him here, asking for answers that were beyond both of them, she couldn't help but feel the pull of something she thought she had let go of long ago. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep doing this to myself. Noah's eyes softened, a flicker of recognition in his gaze as he reached for her hand, pulling her closer. His voice, though weak and unsteady, carried the weight of everything he was feeling in that moment. Please, he said softly. Help me remember. Audra's heart shattered at the sound of his plea. She could see the genuine need in his eyes, the longing for connection, for understanding, and for something they had once shared. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Their past was a tangled mess of emotions, and while Noah might have lost his memories, Audra was all too aware of the cost of love lost. And as she stood there, staring down at the man who had once been her everything, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. But the question remained, could love truly survive when memories were erased, and everything they once had was left in the past? Would they be able to rebuild the pieces of their broken relationship, or was it too late? As Audra stood there, torn between the past and the present, she knew one thing for certain: Noah was no longer the man she once knew, and yet, in his eyes, there was still a trace of the man she had once loved. And in that moment, it was enough to make her wonder if there was hope for them after all. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to close in on Audra as she stood there, watching Noah struggle with the confusion that clouded his mind. The love they once shared, now distant and fragmented, tugged at her heartstrings, but it wasn't enough to make her forget the harsh truth of the past. Noah had moved on from her, at least, that was what she thought. But now, here he was, asking about her as if nothing had changed. As if their lives hadn't been turned upside down by secrets and betrayal. Audra's chest tightened as she tried to push aside the memories of their broken relationship. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore: she knew who had hurt Noah, and she wasn't about to let them get away with it. You need to understand, Noah, Audra said, her voice wavering with the weight of the words she was about to speak. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this to you. I know who did it, and I'm going to make sure they pay for it. Noah blinked, his confusion deepening. What are you talking about, Audra? Who would do something like this? Audra bit her lip, taking a deep breath as the memories flooded back. The nights she spent researching, the whispers she overheard, the threats she ignored. It all came rushing back with a force she hadn't expected. She had tried to move on, but this, the truth, was something she couldn't leave behind. I can't explain it all now, Audra continued, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. But I will. I'll make sure the person who did this faces the consequences. I won't let them get away with what they've done. Noah's eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and hope in his gaze. You know who did this? How? Audra hesitated for a moment before her eyes turned toward the door. She didn't have the answers yet, but she was certain that the man who could help them was already on his way. Meanwhile, outside the hospital room, Detective Burrows was making his way down the sterile hallway. He was a seasoned detective from LA, known for his sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude. Burrows had been assigned to investigate the incident surrounding Noah's accident, but he was already certain that there was more to the story than a simple crash. When he entered the room, his eyes immediately went to Noah, who was still struggling to make sense of his fractured reality. Burrows studied the scene for a moment, sizing up the situation before introducing himself. I'm Detective Burrows, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm investigating the accident involving your son. Nick, who had been standing near Noah's bed, looked up, confused but intrigued. I thought it was just an accident, he said, his voice tinged with skepticism. What makes you think otherwise? Burrows' eyes narrowed slightly, his face unreadable. That's something we'll have to wait and see. But the fact is, there's more to this than a simple car accident. I've got a witness who's come forward. Sharon, standing beside Nick, held her breath, afraid of where this conversation was headed. A witness? Nick asked, his tone shifting from skepticism to concern. What did they see? Burrows leaned in, his voice low and measured. It seems like another vehicle may have intentionally forced your son off the road. And the worst part? That vehicle didn't stop. It just kept going. The air in the room felt thick as the weight of Burrows' words settled in. Noah, still reeling from the haze of his lost memories, looked at the detective, his expression a mix of disbelief and terror. They tried to kill me? Noah asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Burrows met his gaze, his face impassive. I don't know yet. But we're going to find out. Nick and Sharon exchanged a look, the reality of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just an accident. This was a deliberate attack. And someone was out there, still free. Audra, who had been standing at the edge of the room, listening intently, stepped forward, her eyes locked on Burrows. You don't need to worry about it anymore, she said, her voice steady, but there was an undeniable edge to her words. I already know who did this. Nick's eyes darted to her, his surprise evident. What do you mean? Who are you talking about? Audra met his gaze, her jaw tightening with resolve. I'm not going to let them get away with it. I know exactly who did this to Noah. And I'm going to make sure they face justice. Burrows raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her certainty. You know who did this? Audra nodded slowly, her gaze shifting between the detective and Noah. Yes, and I'll tell you everything I know. But first, I need to get out of here. I can't stay here anymore, pretending like everything's okay. Nick looked at her, his confusion deepening. What are you talking about? Why do you want to leave now? Audra's expression softened as she met Noah's gaze. There was so much pain between them, so much history. But Noah was different now. He had changed. And maybe she had, too. I need to go back to Nice, Audra said quietly, her voice breaking. I can't stay here, pretending like I'm okay with everything that's happened. It's too much. And I need to finish this, Noah. For you. For us. The room fell into a tense silence as Audra's words hung in the air. Noah looked at her, his heart aching as he realized the truth behind her decision. She had left him once before, and now, the circumstances were too complicated for her to stay. But despite the pain, Noah knew that she was right. There were things they both needed to face, things that couldn't be fixed in a hospital room. And the answers they sought, the justice that Audra promised, would come at a cost. But he couldn't stop her. Burrows, sensing the heaviness in the room, took a step back. I'll take it from here, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'll handle the investigation, and I'll make sure we get to the bottom of this. Audra gave him a curt nod. Thank you. I won't let this go. I'll make sure they pay for what they've done. With that, Audra turned to leave the room, her heart heavy with the weight of the decisions she had made. She knew what she had to do, and it wasn't going to be easy. But this was the path she had chosen. One that would take her far from Noah, from Genoa City, and toward the answers she desperately needed. As the door closed behind her, the room was filled with a quiet resolve. The game was far from over. And the truth, no matter how painful, would eventually come to light.